In this video, I want to tell you guys how it is that I went from someone who was a totally normal drinker and had control and no issues around alcohol to somebody who had a full-blown alcohol addiction. I make a lot of videos talking about how I overcame my alcohol addiction through a neuroscience treatment called the Sinclair Method. If you want to learn more about it, you can check out my other videos. But today I wanted to share with you really how it is that I fell into the trap of an alcohol addiction, especially when I was someone who, when I started drinking, I had no issues with alcohol. I wanted to share this information because I think for most of us, if not all of us who struggle with alcohol addiction, get there by accident. Like nobody sets out to become addicted to alcohol, but it's something that can happen over time to almost anyone, and that was certainly true for me. Like I never intended to develop the addiction, but before I knew it, and when I finally realized it, it was too late. So I was someone who in my teenage years and early 20s, I would definitely drink and party just like a lot of young people do, but I never had an issue around alcohol to the point where it started to control me. And honestly, I didn't really like drinking and partying and getting drunk. It was more something I did just to kind of fit in and socialize and be with friends. And it was something I would do here and there, but I honestly preferred to not drink because I didn't really like the feeling of being intoxicated. I certainly didn't like the feeling of being hungover, and I didn't like the taste of alcohol. So even though I would drink and even drink to excess and have hangovers, it was something I did more intermittently and rarely and was not an issue for me. In fact, I remember on my 21st birthday, which is like a rite of passage in the US where it's the legal drinking age and we can get alcohol at the store and at the bars. I went out, and I remember I was just sipping on like beers all night, like light beers, and people were buying me shots and drinks. And I ended the night like hardly drinking anything at all. I went back home and I was completely sober and just didn't have a hangover the next day because I was so uninterested in getting drunk and hated hangovers. But fast forward a little bit, and I got into a relationship with someone who was a very heavy drinker, and I really, really liked him, and we ended up having a 5-year relationship where we lived together, and it wound up becoming this extremely toxic and abusive relationship, which is a video for another time. But all this to say, that was kind of my introduction to what heavy drinking looked like. And I don't blame him at all. I was an adult and I made my own decisions. But by being exposed to someone else who I really liked and spent most of my time with, who was a heavy drinker, what happened is I started to take on his drinking styles because I would find that, we'd go out to a restaurant, have a couple drinks with our dinner and be heading home, and I wouldn't want anything more to drink, but he would want to like sit up and keep drinking, and he'd stop at the store and get alcohol. And I remember thinking like, why do you want to drink right now? Like we already had drinks before. But the longer we were together, I started to see that if I wasn't drinking with him, it was kind of building a wedge between us. And so I started to drink alongside him and kind of have these drinking sessions with him. And it actually became something that started to bond us together. And we would have a lot of fun doing it, to be honest. Sometimes not fun at all. But that was really a point in my life where I was like, oh, I actually really like drinking. I like to make cocktails. This is fun. Like, let's party. And I remember clearly thinking that was just a phase I was going through because people in their 20s, it's what they do, right? Like we're supposed to drink and party and then we maybe stop it as we get older. So I remember just thinking, this is a phase, I'm going to outgrow it one day. And I especially thought that to be true as well because for most of my life until that point, I didn't really care for alcohol. And so I just thought that I had more control over it than I actually did. Then one day I remember sitting there and I was drinking and I was thinking, when was the last day that I've gone without alcohol? And I honestly couldn't remember when it had been. I know it had been longer than a year, and it kind of scared me to know that I had been drinking heavily every single day for at least a year. So in that moment, I decided, okay, I'm just going to take a week-long break from alcohol, like let my body rest, take really good care of myself. And I was able to make it through that week, but it also was the time when I recognized that, oh my gosh, this is much more than just a phase. Like this is more of an alcohol dependence. I remember the first night of not drinking, I was just met with these like incessant alcohol cravings and this desire to drink to the point where it was so uncomfortable that most of the nights throughout that alcohol-free week, I was taking sleeping pills just to go to bed early so I didn't have to fight the craving. And I remember throughout that whole week just thinking, oh my gosh, I can't wait till day 8. Like I'm so ready to drink again. And by the time the week was over, I returned to drinking as usual and kind of continued in this cycle for nearly 10 years of kind of drinking really, really heavily, feeling bad about it, trying to take breaks or trying to moderate, whether a week-long break or a 30-day break, or I did a 6-month break one time. But with all of these breaks I would take from alcohol, they were all very difficult. And I always knew in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to drink again one day. It's just a matter of how long I can kind of white knuckle it this time. And again, this was a cycle that I was stuck in for nearly 10 years. And despite me genuinely wanting to get this problem under control, I was so sick and tired of the consequences that were coming from drinking. I found that I couldn't do it. Like, my craving and my desire for alcohol would always lead me back to drinking again because it would be so overwhelming and I would just have to give into it. Like, I didn't care if I was sacrificing my health or my finances or my relationship or my family. I just wanted to get alcohol in my system. And I now know, of course, that is what alcohol addiction is. It essentially hijacks the brain and we no longer have logical control over drinking. It's a more powerful, primitive desire that we have for alcohol. But thankfully in 2017, I learned about the Sinclair Method treatment, which works to reverse alcohol addiction neurologically. And this was, again, after me really trying all kinds of different treatments and things to get this problem under control. And this was the only treatment that worked. And if you look at the data behind it, there's over 100 clinical trials and it's clinically proven to have a 78% success rate. And through this treatment, you actually don't quit drinking. It works over time to help you gradually reduce your drinking. And that's exactly how it worked for me. I started the treatment as a daily drinker, very heavy drinker. And over time, my drinks just started to reduce more and more. I started to have more alcohol-free days that I just genuinely didn't feel like drinking. And I saw myself truly regain my control back over alcohol for the first time in nearly 10 years. Today, I'm over 5 years alcohol-free through this treatment. But again, if I wanted to drink, I could because this treatment actually allows it. But I've just gotten to a point where I just have no interest in alcohol anymore. I honestly feel like I did, in my early days of drinking where I could really take it or leave it when it came to alcohol. Like, yeah, I might drink, but most often I preferred not to just because I didn't like the effects or the taste or the hangovers or things like that. So I honestly feel, and I hear this from so many other people as well, that it feels like the alcohol addiction has been completely erased from my brain, and it's such a gift after battling for so long. If you're struggling today, I definitely encourage you to learn about the Sinclair Method. It's an incredibly powerful treatment. It's been around for nearly 30 years, but unfortunately, most people still don't even know that it exists. But you can look it up online. There's tons of medical journals about it. And of course, I have all my videos and resources here as well with the link in my bio. Thanks for listening.